Sono con Franca Innamorati dell'Ufficio Partenariato Industriale di ICE Agenzia, responsabile del settore restauro e organizzatore di questa settimana italiana del restauro, Alessandro Bozzetti, presidente di Asso Restauro e co-organizzatore dell'evento. Le aziende italiane sono da sempre state protagoniste nel mondo del restauro, come portavoci del sapere conservare all'italiana. Come sappiamo, la parola conservazione ha un significato molto particolare in Italia, tanto da essere utilizzata nel mondo con il termine italiano.
Hello everyone, I'm here with Franca Innamorati from the Office for Industrial Partnership of ICE Agenzia, in charge of the restoration sector and organizer of this Italian Restoration Week. And then Alessandro Buzzetti, the president of Asso Restauro and co-organizer of this event. And of course, the companies operating in the restoration sector have always been, historically, spokespersons in the sense of the Italian conservation and being able to preserve the Italian word conservazione. Conservation has a peculiar meaning and is often used in Italian.
Nel passato gli architetti e i capomastri italiani, insieme alle nostre grandi competenze nell'era preindustriale per la produzione di materiali storici e più recentemente il nostro sistema delle università, delle società, gli esperti, i progettisti e le aziende hanno lavorato portando nel mondo queste competenze, una presenza testimoniata anche da un diffuso riconoscimento nel mondo di queste nostre competenze. Nel 2016 questo sistema industriale è diventato protagonista dell'export italiano. Oggi la seconda edizione della Restoration Week si pone in continuità con le attività che Asso Restauro e l'Istituto del Commercio Estero hanno realizzato sin dal 2006 insieme all'Istituto del Commercio Estero, insieme ad ICE. Franca, come cambia in questo momento lo scenario grazie all'ingresso del restauro nel progetto Restauro Made in Italy?
So architects and master builders together with the skills in the production of materials and also our system of universities and schools and experts and professionals and designers and companies have worked at an international level by sharing all of these skills. So this presence at an international level is also witnessed by a widespread appreciation for our and recognition of our skills. And in 2019, this system has been recognized as one of the excellencies of Made in Italy. Today, this is the launch of the second edition of the Restoration Week, the first one under the auspices of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in continuity with the activities and actions that ICE Agenzia and Asso Restauro have been carrying out since 2006. So, Franca, how has the promotional scenario changed in consideration of the this project, Restauro Made in Italy?
Il Restauro Made in Italy è la prima forma, la prima espressione di questo nuovo accento del restauro quale testimonial di eccellenza, di alta eccellenza in termini di sistema paese. ICE Agenzia è orgogliosa di dare attraverso la Restoration Week questo nuovo e innovativo appuntamento sia per le aziende italiane che per tutta la realtà estera che vive e respira dell'attività quotidiana dei nostri operatori esteri, anch'essi coinvolti nel settore.
Of course, Restauro Made in Italy is the first, let's say, form of this new approach considered as an excellence of the country system. So restoration considered as an element of excellence. So ICE is very proud of the Restoration Week, also considering the new approach adopted for Italian companies as well as international ones that are certainly including all of the Italian excellence that is widespread at an international level.
È con orgoglio, ma soprattutto con degli obiettivi specifici già articolati su diverse realtà paese, verso i quali intendiamo promuovere il settore in termini sia di tradizione che di innovazione, di expertise, di tecnologia italiana. Sono tutti termini che potranno dialogare in maniera più approfondita con varie realtà geografiche estere. Diversi paesi hanno già espresso il loro interesse a collaborare con noi e quindi la collaborazione tra ICE Agenzia e Asso Restauro attraverso la Restoration Week è di nuovo un punto di partenza per dare vita, per dare contenuto ad un'opera comune, italiana ed estera, in cui da entrambe le parti possiamo, da parte italiana, valorizzare le nostre radici e la nostra tradizione, ripeto, la nostra expertise, ed è un patrimonio che mettiamo ben volentieri a disposizione di realtà che con molto interesse ci guardano. Faccio un accenno a paesi come l'Egitto, come l'Arabia Saudita, come il Tagikistan, insieme ad altri paesi che già hanno avviato e hanno già forme di collaborazioni in fase di realizzazione con noi.
I am definitely proud to consider these goals that we have put in place with different countries. Our idea and our desire is to promote the Italian sector when it comes to our tradition, but also innovation, also in consideration of the important Italian expertise. And this is something that we want to share at an international level with all of the international countries. And in fact, different countries have already shown their interest in collaborating with ICE and Asso Restauro. And the Restoration Week is a point of start in order to launch a number of shared activities. And also this is an occasion for Italy to enhance its roots and expertise. And we are definitely willing to share our heritage with other countries, including but not limited to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Tajikistan, and other countries that have expressed their desire to collaborate with us.
Grazie Franca. Alessandro, in qualità di presidente di Asso Restauro, qual è il maggiore impegno e la responsabilità che chiediamo alle nostre aziende per affrontare la sfida dell'export?
Grazie Andrea e buongiorno a tutti. Credo che l'impegno più importante sia quello di una attenta e meticolosa conoscenza dell'oggetto del restauro, a partire dalla conoscenza storica, architettonica, artistica, dei materiali, delle tecnologie che lo compongono, così come quella delle nostre aziende che sperimentano le tecniche, i materiali, le tecnologie per applicarle, così come una grande formazione dei restauratori e delle maestranze che poi sono coloro che danno corpo all'intervento vero e proprio.
So our main commitment is to have a careful and deep knowledge of the object that we intend to intervene in, so the object of our restoration. And when I say knowledge, I mean from a historical and artistic viewpoint, including the origin of an object. So our companies are now testing a number of new materials and technologies, and we also provide training to all of those that operate in the restoration field, so restorers, but also the workforce.
Ecco, la responsabilità più grande che abbiamo credo sia proprio quella di aver ereditato un metodo di restauro che abbiamo, come dire, il dovere di poter condurre avanti, il dovere di esportarlo in altri paesi stranieri con l'attenzione, la meticolosità di cogliere la loro cultura, i loro metodi, le loro usanze e tradizioni, per non imporre una progettazione, ma andare con un metodo condiviso.
So our responsibility, well, we certainly inherited our restoration method and we want to export to other countries. But the thing is that we of course, we want to include the culture and the tradition of other countries. So we do not want to impose our method, we want to find a shared way to intervene.
Ed è quello che abbiamo fatto da tanti anni con Asso Restauro, e che essere stati inclusi nel Made in Italy ci rende molto orgogliosi e ci dà molta riconoscenza e appunto responsabilità. E tutto questo è quello che noi possiamo e dobbiamo portare ed esportare nel Made in Italy.
So over the last few years, this is what we have been doing with Asso Restauro. The fact of being included in the Made in Italy is something that makes us proud, but also even more responsible. And this is what we certainly want to continue to do.
Allora, grazie Franca, grazie Alessandro. Noi ci incontreremo più volte nel corso di questa settimana e dopo questa piccola introduzione andiamo allora a cominciare con la Restoration Week 2020.
So we are certainly going to meet on several occasions during this week, and so after this brief introduction we're going to start the presentations of the Restoration Week. Thank you.
Grazie.
The effect of greatness upon our feelings sometimes overlooks the joy to roam among the energies of the history that surrounds us. Everyone has a purpose, something to achieve, somewhere to go, a place to belong to. However, sometimes the best part of a journey is getting lost. Allow yourself the time to take the lesser traveled route and let your passion take over. Let yourself be surprised by the unexpected. History is everywhere. How can you think about life without it? Sometimes I ask myself, what's beyond the surface? Everything I've undiscovered from the past makes me conscious of our future. We are all part of a synchronized process, cooperating together to achieve the common goal, to design the final vision. A perfect balance between history and technology contributes to the optimal preservation of our heritage and leads it into the future. Tradition has defined rules, while our modern industrial supply chains become stronger, boosting our approach and proficiency. All this heritage value surrounds us, even where you don't expect it. Be curious. You'll discover a new knowledge that will help you to grow. Eventually, I peeled back the history beyond the surface, other lives, other journeys. My work is not finished yet. There's a huge heritage to look after, to carve in memory, and to preserve for next generations. This is who I am, what I stand for. This is my profession.
So, welcome to the Restoration Week 2020, the first digital edition of the Restoration Week. My name is Andrea Grilletto, I'm the director of Asso Restauro, and Asso Restauro is the national Italian association representing the industry of restoration, manufacturers of materials, equipment and technologies, supplies of services and specialized companies which represent the sector of restoration and conservation of cultural heritage both in Italy and abroad. Asso Restauro, as we said in the introduction, is cooperating with the Italian Trade Agency to promote the Italian restoration sector since 2005. The change on our promotional system, as Franca Innamorati was introducing at the beginning, began in 2018 with the Ministry of Economic Development recognizing restoration industry as part of the Made in Italy sector. Let me just tell some words about this week. We will spend together 5 days. This is the first one. We are in Amatrice. On the 25th of September, Friday, we will close this first edition of the Restoration Week with an international conference. Part of the invited guests of the Restoration Week are here today in presence. It was very, very hard to have them here because of the COVID restriction. They are coming from Albania, they are coming from Egypt, they are coming from Brussels, but Europa Nostra, and they are coming from the United States and France. We have decided to invite the most important organization in the work dealing in some way and financing the restoration sector abroad. The idea is to create a common table of discussion to be more proficient in our action for the promotion of the restoration abroad. Restoration is a very difficult word, and what it is, restoration is a very difficult question to answer to. In Italy, you know, we have a peculiar methodology and approach, as Alessandro said in the introduction to the restoration. How to rebuild, where to rebuild, it's a very difficult question, and this week we are trying to give an answer, an international answer to this question. We were seeking for the proper English word to translate restituire. In Italian, restituire means give back something to someone. And every day during this week, we are talking about an object, in that case an historical object, that is given back to the community, to the local community or to the international community as a resource for the development of the social and economical asset of the local area. Each of the international organizations that are present in the Restoration Week, both in presence but also in remote, so connected, are investing money in the restoration sector with different purposes: for increasing the occupational asset of the local place, for increasing the culture, for increasing the tourism. So the word we found to translate restituire can be regeneration or recreation. So we are talking about regeneration and recreation of local assets. Today this is the first episode, on the first day of the Restoration Week. We are in Amatrice. As you know, Amatrice is the center of the huge earthquake that occurred in 2016. We will have a look lately on the city center. On my back you can see the model of the ancient city and the problem of how to reconstruct an entire area, an entire urban center is the center of this day. As you know, in Italy, the symbols that are creating the community are often, especially in small villages, related to the church, the bell tower, high buildings, tall buildings, the sound of the bell are in some way participating to the daily life of the people. So the first intervention that I have the honor to present, is a speech of Monsignor Domenico Pompili, Bishop of Rieti, which is a special witness of the first phases of the earthquake and the phases of the reconstruction.
I'm Domenico Pompili, Bishop of Rieti, within which there is Amatrice, which was a theatre of a terrible earthquake that took place on the 24th of August 2016. We are in the area of Donna Minozzi, an orphanage that was built by this priest who was born in Amatrice in the 30s throughout all the 60s of the previous century. This space that you can see will be completely rebuilt from the ground up with the aim of actually allowing this orphanage to take on a new direction. In fact, we would like to make it the so-called home of the future, where there will be 4 major areas. In the main area, in the first area, there will be a series of buildings devoted to the welcoming, to the young who want to rediscover the relationship between man and the environment based on the Laudato Si by Pope Francis. And then in the second area, we would like to focus on rediscovering the arts and crafts by placing greater importance on the food sector in collaboration with slow food. La terza area, che è alle mie spalle, this area will be based on the welcoming of the elderly, of those people who are in perhaps difficult conditions in terms of their health. Then the last area will be devoted to the administrative offices of the municipality of Amatrice. So we would like to actually give life to an area of about 18,000 square meters, an area that undoubtedly will be at the very heart of the new Amatrice. L'idea madre di questa ricostruzione, perciò, the objective of this plan, of this reconstruction, is not only to rebuild this area and these buildings as they were before, based on what they were before in the past, but we would like to rather reinterpret them, these buildings, and with the objective of actually making it more useful for the new needs of contemporary society. The intent is actually not to just rebuild the buildings as they were previously, but we would like to rather show even the wounds of this earthquake, wounds that may allow people in the future to understand that the historical center of Amatrice is not only made up of the historical venues, but also it is made up of the people who will inhabit and who will live in these buildings in the future.
Grazie per la vostra
Thank you very much
attenzione e
for
per la
your
cura
attention,
con
and
cui
thank you
seguite
very much
questa opera
for
di
the attention that you have
rigenerazione
placed
di
to
una
our
realtà
work of regeneration
urbana
of
come Amatrice,
the
che
town
può
of
costituire
Amatrice,
per
because this
l'architettura
regeneration truly
contemporanea
can
un banco
represent
di
a
prova,
test bed, a very important
importante
test bed
ed
also
esigente.
for others elsewhere.
It is extremely difficult today walking through Amatrice to recognize the former urban asset of the city that you can see in this model on my back. The local authorities are facing a very, very difficult challenge together with the Ministry of Culture, the Lazio region, and all the actors that are working for the reconstruction. We want to stress three words that we think that can represent the actual situation of Amatrice. Rebuild buildings. That means that's a matter of bricks, stones, mortar, cement, concrete, but it deals also with architecture and urban planning. What and how to rebuild a context that is completely demolished, or the most part of it have been demolished by the earthquake. Recreate the identity of a place which is lost together with its stones, with its brick, with the falling out of those elements of the city that creates the identity of every person living here. Regenerate the economy, to reinvent a place, its economy, its tourism, and plan the future of the city. Rebuild the building or part of the building is not enough to give a new life of this place. Today we will talk with the municipality, the mayor, the Board of Council for the Culture about future programs for the reconstruction, not only to go over the emergency. A part of this speech has been made by the mayor of Amatrice, Antonio Fontanella.
Benvenuti nella nostra cittadina, Amatrice, almeno così come era prima del terremoto. Io sono il sindaco Antonio Fontanella. Il nostro territorio è situato a 955 metri sul livello del mare ed è in quella parte del Lazio che si insinua tra le Marche, l'Umbria e l'Abruzzo, alle pendici dei Monti della Laga, alti tutti 2400 metri e parte del grande Parco Nazionale Gran Sasso e Monti della Laga.
Welcome to everybody, to our city, Amatrice, or at least this is Amatrice as it was before the earthquake. I am Antonio Fontanella, the mayor, and our territory is placed at 955 meters above the level of the sea, and it is in that area of Latium, between Latium, Marche, and Abruzzo regions. At or near the Monti della Laga, which are high 2,000 and 4,000 meters, and which is part of the Parco Nazionale del Gran Sasso and the Monti della Laga.
Il capoluogo è circondato da 69 frazioni. Sono 69 centri rurali molto vivaci in cui si pratica l'agricoltura e la zootecnia. La caratteristica infatti delle produzioni tipiche del territorio sono il pecorino ed il guanciale, sono gli ingredienti fondamentali di una famosa ricetta conosciuta in tutto il mondo che è gli spaghetti alla matriciana.
As you know, this area is very large. It is made up of 69 different smaller towns where there are many agriculturers, farmers, and herd raisers. And in fact, one of the typical products of the territory are the pecorino and the guanciale, which are the two main ingredients of a very important and famous dish, i.e. the spaghetti alla matriciana.
Tutto il territorio ha origini già all'epoca romana, ci sono sulla Via Salaria molte testimonianze di quel periodo e il centro storico di Amatrice era circondato da mura ed è ricco di monumenti e di chiese. Quelle principali sono del XIII secolo, sono la chiesa di San Francesco, un annesso, un antico convento, la torre civica, la chiesa di Santa Maria Lauretana dove era stato istituito il museo civico e tante altre chiese come Sant'Agostino, Madonna di Portaferrata, chiesa costruita a ridosso di una delle porte d'ingresso della nostra cittadina.
So our territory, our town dates back to the Roman period. In the Via Salaria, in fact, there are many items that testify the fact that it dates back to that period. Now, the town was surrounded by walls. It is rich in monuments and churches. The main ones date back to the 13th century. For example, the Chiesa di San Francesco with a convent, the tower, and the Santa Maria de Napoletana church where the civic museum was established, and then many other churches, Sant'Agostino, Madonna di Portaferrata, for example, which was built very close to one of the doors that were used as an entrance to our city.
Questo territorio così ricco di centri abitati ha rappresentato un'importanza fondamentale anche per lo sviluppo di opere d'arte, di monumenti, di antichità e la nostra cittadina è conosciuta anche per essere la cittadina delle 100 chiese, proprio perché ogni centro abitato aveva la sua chiesa e nel centro storico di Amatrice tra l'altro ce n'erano moltissime.
Undoubtedly, our territory is very rich in many different from many different points of view. And it was a fundamental, our area, our city, also in terms of antiquity, of art monuments. Our town, for example, is very well known as the town of the 100 churches because in each smaller town around Amatrice there was one church, and that's why it's called the city of the 100 churches.
Oggi l'obiettivo di tutti è quello di ricostruire questo straordinario patrimonio storico, architettonico di cui era ricco il nostro paese. Il centro storico era il centro di confluenza di tutte le popolazioni di questo circondario di paesi e in esso si svolgeva la vita della cittadina. Dobbiamo assolutamente ricostruire i nostri elementi fondamentali, identitari, come le nostre chiese, le nostre piazze, la nostra torre civica che è stata il simbolo della resistenza durante il terremoto.
We absolutely have to rebuild this incredible cultural and historical heritage that our town represents. The historical town of our city was very important for all of the population living around this area, and this is where people lived their everyday life. So that is why it is so important for us to rebuild the historical part of the city because they represent our identity. For example, the churches, the squares, the tower, which was a symbol of resistance during the period of the earthquake.
Questi monumenti sono la nostra storia e accanto alla ricostruzione delle case bisogna ricostruire questa nostra identità. Solo in questa maniera possiamo ricostruire anche lo spirito di comunità e di appartenenza che ci legava a questo straordinario territorio.
These monuments truly represent our history. And we have to rebuild, to reconstruct, and not only the homes, but also the historical parts of our city, because it is only in this way that we will be able to rebuild that spirit that truly drew together all people of our city together.
Il restauro di questi monumenti è la rinascita della nostra identità, della nostra comunità, della nostra storia, e accanto a questo restauro possiamo ovviamente ricostruire il resto della nostra comunità.
By restoring our city, we will be able to allow our identity, our history, and also our community to live once again. So it is thanks to that restoration that we will be able to truly give and back life to our community.
Il restauro dei monumenti costituisce la rigenerazione della nostra comunità. Solo trovando e recuperando la nostra storia è possibile ricostruire il nostro futuro.
Why is it that it is so important to restore monuments? Because it truly allows our community to live once again. It is only by recovering our history that we will be able to actually plan and live our future.
Bene, grazie per l'attenzione e a presto nella nostra cittadina.
Thank you for your kind attention, and I hope to see you again in our city.
Together with Paolo Iannelli, Special Superintendent for the earthquake to 24th August 2016, Task Force MIBACT U4Age, and General Manager for the National Emergency. We are talking about the procedures of emergency, talk about the after the earthquake and the administrative and technical problem that are connected with the reconstruction.
Buongiorno a tutti, intanto e grazie per l'invito e per questa occasione molto importante di poter affrontare questo tema, che è un tema estremamente interessante anche da un punto di vista tecnico. Il restauro, quando si ha a che fare con delle calamità
restoration when faced with natural calamities.
Dopo, una calamità naturale.
Now, this, of course, entails some issues, some problems that differentiate it from normal rebuilding, normal restoration. Why? Because, of course, we have to face an emergency. Now, when there is an emergency of this type, there are two types of damages. One damage, that is the damage that entails from the earthquake, and then a damage that occurs afterwards. So we have to clearly distinguish these two types of damages, because for each kind of damage, we have to try to intervene in a different way. Now, as to the immediate damage, the first one, i.e. the one that is directly connected to the event, in this case, the earthquake, which, of course, has caused some damage on the buildings due to the physical damage caused by the earthquake. But then there's a second type of damage, the deferred damage, which is directly proportional to a set of elements. So once the buildings have been damaged by the earthquake, a set of vulnerabilities crop up, which often bring about a damage that is even greater than the one that arose immediately after the earthquake. So from a technical point of view, we have to try to differentiate our actions based on these two types of damages. Now, as to the immediate damage is the one that struck the foundations and the buildings themselves. So in order to try to reduce that damage, we have to act before, with prevention, with resilience. So we have to carry out a whole set of preventive activities on the structures, changing the loads and seismic type of activities which are able to allow those structures to better withstand an earthquake. Now, as to the deferred damage, instead, it's a damage that starts with the event themselves. And the damage, therefore, can be very serious, and therefore, to reduce this damage, we have to, of course, manage the emergency in the best of ways. In order to do so, we have to establish an operative structure that is as effective as possible. The Ministry for Cultural Heritage, the MEBAC, from the year 2013, has developed a special group that is entrusted with evaluating the damage and then trying to protect these structures and creation of laboratories, etc. Now, this is very important in order to try to intervene in the protection of the cultural heritage. Then we need also standards, we need procedures. So the directive that was established by the ministry, in fact, is aimed not only at establishing things from an organizational point of view, but also at creating a whole set of documents that help people during the survey in order to allow them to carry out surveys as fast as possible. And then also a set of procedures to protect the structures in order such that they may not damage other areas. For example, furniture, or also the protection with roofs in order to protect the buildings from the rain, and the protection of frescoes, for example, in order to protect them too from the rain and from atmospheric elements. Now, so we need a full-fledged strategy. That is very important indeed, because if after the earthquake, after the quake, this will be very, very important. So the restoration starts from there with these interventions. If the interventions are deferred and if they're not sufficient, the restoration, of course, will be limited, and we won't be able to try to salvage as many goods as possible. For example, if a fresco was damaged by the rain, often it's almost impossible to restore it. So everything starts from the survey. There are two levels of surveys. In the first level of the survey, we have to single out what areas we have to intervene upon. And then in a second survey, we try to establish better what damage the building was subject to and what actions have to be carried out. Now, that survey is carried out with a whole set of documents that consider, for example, various aspects connected to earthquake, but also to other environmental problems. Now, of course, in doing this, we have to use computerized systems, and in fact, at the moment, we also adopt tablets in order to carry out surveys as fast as possible. And we also try to aggregate the data that we collect, such as to redefine our strategies during the time while we achieve that information. Now, in particular, as to what happened here in Amatrice, as to that earthquake that we referred to before, this event, of course, did entail quite a lot of problems, because we are talking in this case of three seismic activities, three quakes that were separated one from the other. Now, it was not one big quake with smaller quakes that followed, as it would happen normally, but here we had three quakes of the great magnitude, of the great intensity, which, as you can see there, redefined the crater, extending it in other areas in a dynamic way, creating a whole set of problems also from a management point of view. So, here you can see the number of cultural heritage areas that were involved. As you can see, there are many, and we're talking both about buildings, but also about other works of art. So indeed, so many items that, of course, involved further difficulties. Now, as to the quake, now an office was created, the special office for the earthquake, an office that was not supposed to replace the administrative offices that already existed, but was supposed to actually coordinate the emergency activities and the phase that followed afterwards. So the office was not a watchdog for others, but it was just aimed at coordinating the activities of all other offices. One of the first positive achievements of this office was that we were able to start with reconstruction in the immediate phase after the quake, because sometimes it happens that during the emergency you handle, you have to tackle a lot of problems day by day, and then at some point you stop and you start with the ordinary activities aimed at restoring. In this case, instead, we tried to carry out during the emergency itself, also activities aimed at the reconstruction, so reconstruction during the emergency itself. Now, in the subsequent phase, for example, the planning is very important. So while we were still trying to protect some of the buildings, at that same moment we were developing reconstruction plans which were aimed at protecting the buildings with a view at protecting them in a more definitive way. Now, as to the interventions that were carried out on the buildings, we did not only act as trying to preserve them, but we were also trying to rebuild them in some cases. Why? Because we were trying to push for reconstruction, although we were, of course, aware that the emergency was on its way, and we had to tackle that too. Now, of course, one of the great problems was that buildings were falling apart during that moment, during that period. So we had to select some areas that were fundamental in terms of the reconstruction, that were important because of their cultural identity. So we have to, during the reconstruction, we have to try to promote the identity of the town, and that therefore is very, very important.
So, of course, we do not know sometimes how we can reuse the things that we recover, but we can manage the debris and rubble. But, of course, if you do not think about how to act in advance, that you cannot reuse the materials that you have recovered. So we know that if you don't recover anything, you have no chance for the future. This is the reason why we've decided to recover materials and rubbles. And together with our teams, we have selected the materials, and we have a number of, let's say, deposits of these materials. And of course, these are deposits in which we include these materials, these debris, which have to be rearranged. Similarly important is, of course, the de-risking of several areas. And of course, we had several warehouses, let's say, according to the quantity of materials we had to store. And in these areas, we store both the damaged heritage and also the heritage that we save before additional earthquakes or rain or snow further damage. So these assets and this heritage has been extensive. We're talking about thousands of objects which imposed additional food for thought to all of us, because many of these objects were not even damaged. And this earthquake was so strong, so terrible for the community, that another pathway had to be started. This is how to operate in order to give back some of the usability of these objects, maybe the less damaged ones or the ones which are restored or de-risked, in order to be given back to the community. And for two main reasons. One is because that is their heritage, and of course it has to be given back to them. And secondly, these territories ask people not to leave these things, because these objects are important identity elements for them, and then they have to go back to the places in which they were. Unfortunately, we know that the reconstruction of buildings and hamlets is inevitably long, mainly due to a series of complications, including infrastructures and logistics and the territory. There are some problems that, of course, entail a new planning. So it is necessary to adopt a new town planning, and then we have different activities to be put in place. But we have to give back culture to the population, and also to the identity value, mainly linked to their heritage, to their cultural heritage that was de-risked, that was recovered, and which has to be given back to them. So, as I said, the debris and rubble that was managed through a specific directive, that is to say, one, the management of debris linked to cultural heritage; second, the objects linked to historical value; and thirdly, objects of no value, so that those that had to intervene could make decisions quickly. But then, of course, these interventions entail that institutions have to collaborate with one another, and they have to deploy specific framework agreements, and it's necessary to involve the different stakeholders. For instance, here in Rieti, there was an agreement with the Rone organization, through which a specific restoration lab was established. But of course, all of these actions and agreements were signed in several regions, and they have a practical value, because of course they can bring the restoration to the territory, so that also the fact of showing how a restoration evolves, showing this in a place that was struck so hard, is a way to keep the love of people close to those objects. And people probably saw those objects in other places within the city, but then they are close to them while being restored. And then, in the case of San Benedetto, we signed an agreement with the University of Padua for a number of scientific and technical activities, especially where the severity of the event imposes a number of assessments linked not just to possible uses, but also other evaluations. But we have ongoing sites, always working, and this is a continuous improvement that we provide. And this is a sort of obligation that we impose, because it can also be longer as a pathway, but in any case, if the community can go to the place in which the community used to live and which they hopefully want to go back as soon as possible, then people have to access those areas. For instance, in San Salvatore in Campi, near Noccia, together with the bishop, we organized a number of events where, for instance, although in a building site and in a situation of emergency, we could somehow celebrate masses. So this is a way for having building sites close to the community. So a series of new perspectives. In the case of San Benedetto, we had a photographic call, so that, for instance, those that have pictures of the church, well, they can, for instance, send those pictures and allow, while replanning the church, to take into consideration how the church was and what the community remembers of that specific building. So opening one's mind to pathways that are more complex, for sure. So this is not a bare reconstruction, which is an end to itself. Rather, it entails a number of initiatives that have to contribute to rebuild and to consolidate those assets, but not just that, because an event like this one imposes a planning which is completely different, and also we also need a number of initiatives that are far more complex. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Paolo, for this presentation, which is very, very important to enlarge the context of the reconstruction of the seismic area. The seismic area is not only Amatrice. Of course, today we are dealing with mainly with Amatrice. So let's come back to Amatrice with Alessio Serafini and Federica di Napoli Rampolla. Alessio is the assessor for the culture of the municipality of Amatrice, and we'll talk about a brief history of the town. Federica di Napoli Rampolla is the restorer of the local superintendency, and we'll talk about of a little, not so little, treasure that we have in Amatrice, the Church of San Francesco. Alessio.
Grazie e innanzitutto benvenuti, è un piacere ospitarvi. Parlo a nome di tutto quanto il Consiglio Comunale. Amatrice è un paese importante, una cittadina importante, le sue origini si fanno risalire al Medioevo. Durante l'epoca dell'incastellamento, appunto, viene costruito quello che adesso è il centro storico. Adesso dico perché poi di fatto con i disastrosi eventi del terremoto del 2016 del centro storico è rimasto ben poco. Proprio da questo noi abbiamo la consapevolezza di dover appunto ripartire. Un territorio importante fatto non solo del centro storico ma anche di ben 69 frazioni, centri rurali più piccolini appunto che gravitavano attorno all'orbita appunto di Amatrice, un po' come la città dell'Aquila ed il suo
as it happens with L'Aquila and the villages around it, but that is, in the case of Amatrice, at a smaller scale.
Il paese presenta, la cittadina presentava appunto delle notevoli strutture architettoniche,
had some outstanding architectural buildings, and I'm specifically referring to churches like St. Francis, St. Augustine, or St. Emilio, another saint, another church, and the Church of St. John, and the walls of the city walls, because the city had a 2.5-kilometer city walls with 7 gates, and there were also, for instance, some monks, the Dominicans, the Augustinians, and the Capuchins, which are other monks. So, of course, all of the different types and groups of monks were here, and we have the city plan in which all of these streets are parallel to one another, like a grid, for instance. And in addition to that, Amatrice was an important city
rivestiva un ruolo importante sul confine di quello che era il
it
Regno di
played
Napoli,
an important
perché
role
appunto Amatrice
in the
faceva parte del
neighboring
Regno di
kingdom of
Napoli, era la
Naples, because
cittadina più a
Amatrice
nord. Nel
was the
1486
city
questa
in the
città fu
far
anche
north
sede
of
di
the
una
kingdom of
zecca,
Naples.
appunto,
And there was
la
also a
zecca di
mint,
Amatrice,
the
anche
mint
se
of
non si hanno
Amatrice,
notizie
although we have
certe,
no
ha
certain
emesso
news
delle
about
monete, i
it,
cavalli
coins
amatriciani
were
appunto con il
issued
logo
with the
di
logo
Amatrice,
of
un
Amatrice,
cavallo
and there
e
was a
la
horse
scritta
on it, and
Fidelis
also
Amatrix, quindi una
Fidelis
cittadina
topics, it was the wording in that specific coin. So Amatrice played a specific and strategic role in the entire kingdom because it was a bordering village. And it was important for the defense from external invasions, like, for instance, with the Vatican State. It belonged to the Abruzzi region, but then it was annexed to the Lazio region when the province of Rieti was established. So this part was somehow taken away from the Abruzzi region and annexed to the Lazio region under the province of Rieti. And then it is part of that land that is described as an area between the Marches region, the Umbria region, and the Abruzzi region as well.
Eccomi.
Here I am.
Buonasera, sono Federica di Napoli Rampolla.
Federica di Napoli
Sono la
Rampolla,
restauratrice,
and
una
I'm
delle
one of
restauratrici
the
del
restorers from the
che ha
Ministry of
collaborato
Cultural
sin
Heritage,
dall'inizio
and I've collaborated
ai
since
recuperi,
the
ai lavori
beginning on
proprio
the
in momento di
recovery of
emergenza.
debris, especially when the
In
emergency
realtà
started. So as a matter of
io
fact,
facevo parte del
I was
secondo,
part of the
diciamo del secondo gruppo di
second,
attività operativo ed ero legata
group
alla
of operational
sovrintendenza da una
activities,
parte
and I was
e
linked to
al
the
deposito
superintendency on the one
dall'altra,
side
perché
and to the
recuperavo
warehouse on the
insieme
other side, because I
a un team
used to
bello
recover together
copioso
with
di
a
vigili del
team
fuoco,
of
carabinieri
fire police and
e
carabinieri
ovviamente protezione
and
civile e
civil
colleghi
protection and other colleagues from the ministry. We used to recover objects and debris directly from churches, and mainly all of the works that had to be taken to the warehouse in Città Ducale. So I had direct contact with both the superintendency and also with the persons in charge of the emergency based in Rome, and the entire sector dealing with the recovery of the materials in Città Ducale. So as the first part of the activity, as it finished, well, it lasted for something like 84 missions, and of course, we had some heavy effects because it was complicated, to carry out all of these activities. I've continued to work in the territory because I specifically dealt with the first consolidation of the wall paintings and the recovery of the fragments from churches. We have a lot of churches in Amatrice. We had 113 churches.
Fino a noi sono purtroppo molto di meno. Una ventina sono
20 churches have collapsed directly with the first
però
earthquake.
siccome questi terremoti si sono susseguiti tra il primo e il secondo di un mese e
And
mezzo,
as the
praticamente
earthquakes
quello che si era
continued
già
for
molto
1 month,
lesionato durante
all
la
of the
prima
buildings
scossa
that had
è
undergone
crollata
problems in
nella
the
scossa, nelle
first
due
earthquake
scosse di
then
ottobre.
collapsed
Io ho lavorato sin
1
dai
month
primi
later.
giorni. Il primo recupero
I
è stato
started
quello
since the
del museo di
beginning, for instance, the
Sant'Emilio,
Museum of Sant'Emilio,
che ovviamente raccoglieva le opere più belle di tutta la conca,
which
e
gathered the
quindi
main works of the
ovviamente
entire
avevo lavorato
area.
per prima. Però
And then
successivamente mi sono dedicata a tutto quello che ovviamente era
I
raggiungibile
devoted myself to the recovery of all the things that could be easily reached
non subito, e
and the things that were
specificatamente alla fine ho
subsequently
finito col rimanere
reached. And then I've remained here for love, and especially to the Church of St. Francis. The Church of San Francesco, this is the facade, and the Madonna was among the first things that the fire police recovered. And
immediatamente, visto che lo stato della chiesa era
since the condition of the church was quite terrible, it was not possible to enter the church. But then we had to wait that part of these debris were removed, especially those we're going to see in the next few slides, especially, for instance, all the things that were dangerous, like trusses. And then I followed the pathway together with a number of colleagues. And then we worked in that area that was the only one that we could reach, just to explain to you how difficult it was to access it. But then we continued with the works, and
And then you see all of the images. Here you see this could be reached without moving stones, and it was 1 meter and 80 from the ground, and it was 1 meter and 80 centimeters of debris. And then, if we continue with the images, this is just to show to you what was the condition of frescoes. From here, we see that the surface was very much ruined, and of course we were lucky because on the left-hand side of the church at the beginning, or maybe the right-hand side when he accessed it, well, it was completely collapsed, but the other walls were standing. So at the beginning, I was shocked because the fact of entering the church and seeing the general condition of the church, it was depressing. But then I have an entire general album with the pictures of before and after of all frescoes. And I have to be honest in telling you that many walls collapsed that were not including frescoes. So 10% of the walls cannot be recovered. Let's put it this way. So if we see the images, then you realize what the situation was. So here I was trying to somehow manage the walls still standing, but all of the frescoes were treated in this way. So they had a layer of fabric, of rubberized fabric. And then this is another important and wonderful part, because when we entered in the initial part that collapsed, we found this fragment on the one side, and it is the old. So as you know, the narthex were 5 lunette with a colored area, whereas what we see now is 5, or better, those that we were supposed to see. Is 5 lunette with no decorations, because the decorations were on the wall. So we recovered everything. So the fragment you see is half of my nail, and it's the finger of one of the figures that are in a second order of the fresco. And it was, I think, at 6 meters of height. Maybe not even the painter could see it when entering the church, but it was there. And then if you continue to see the pictures, these are the various species that we were lucky enough to find and to trace back. And these are all of the pieces that I consider as large ones, so try and figure out the rest. Think about the fragments I gathered and collected, and I collected all the fragments with other colleagues. I had colleagues that helped me to collect all of those pieces and fragments. So this was the statue of Camillo Orsini that fell down, and despite of the crash, it was lucky enough that it just had a scratch on one side only. So, of course, he was an important person, and he was also a leader, an important person in Amatrice. And this is the altar, which is the most important part of the church, and which collapsed, as you saw in the first images. But I can tell you that we have cleaned it, and everything is in Rieti, in another warehouse, and we can somehow rebuild it. So these are the contributions of this colleague. So this is the church it was before, and you see the altar as it was during the 50s. And the same goes for the rest. I mean, I don't know whether it is going to be back as it was, but we will do our best. This is for sure. Thank you.
Grazie. Thank you, Federica. I think that the little finger that you recovered from the rubbish is part of the conscience of the people of Amatrice, and it will be part of the regeneration of the place. Thank you very much. Cooperation and collaboration are the keywords of this Restoration Week. The international organizations which are present here now are part of the regeneration of Amatrice, or can be part of this regeneration. I wanted to introduce you Alessandra Peruzzetto, representing the World Monument Fund, and the World Monument Fund has a future project here in Amatrice.
Thank you. Well, I'm Alessandra Peruzzetto. I work for the War Monuments Fund. We are an American organization, non-profit organization, dedicated to the preservation and protection of heritage sites in the world. One of our major programs is the War Monuments Watch. That is, every 2 years we nominate sites. We receive some nomination. We receive 5, and there is a selection, and 25 of these sites are nominated on a list. In 2018. Specifically, we received a nomination for the Church of Sant'Emilio, which is the Museum of Cola Filatesio here in Amatrice, just a few months, 1 year after the earthquake. And it is one of these 25 sites that was nominated, and since 2017 we are working with the Superintendenza, in the major Superintendenza based in Rome, and then with the municipality of Amatrice, for trying to give attention to this monument and trying to find the best solution, or which are the procedure for its preservation, its protection and then preservation. And after these years we could find recently some support, and we are starting in collaboration with the Superintendenza and with the municipality later a new project for the protection of one part of the museum. I don't know if you yes, you have it, so that we can see them. That's it. This was the church, then became a museum in the 1990s, early 2000, I think. And Cola Filatesio. As you can see, the first work, we could not intervene immediately. This work were done by the Minister of Culture, and they are how do you say in English? Preservation work to maintain the structures of reinforcement of the tower and of part of the museum that has been preserved. And the access could not be, it was not possible inside the building itself because of the status of the tower and of the other walls. So now that everything has been put in security, access is possible in what is called the narthex, which is this part, the wall that you could see at the bottom. And so we can start working there in coordination with the Minister of Culture. Yes, it was on the other side, so we can start working on the I don't know, it's not here, it's behind. Anyway, so this is the work that has been done until now, and then the work can start only inside in the next months.
Thank you, Alessandra. Thank you very much for your presence here. It is a very important witnessing of how the international organization like the World Monument Fund can participate to the regeneration of Amatrice and the surrounding area. Thank you very much. Regeneration seems to be the key word that we are using today, and regeneration means future, not only rebuilt, as we said, but start planning the future of the city and of the area. Tabula rasa, the Roman used to say. For Amatrice and the area of the earthquake, that means a tragic opportunity to think about a new city better if we can start from knowing very well the past of the city and come back to the past of the city with our imagination and try to imagine a former fortress. Alessio will show us an almost unknown part of the city, the remains of the defensive wall. They are almost inaccessible, but this morning we were able with the drone to fly over the walls, and Alessio will tell you something about that.
Well, yes, indeed. In fact, this morning we went out to this place. However, unfortunately, this area is not accessible because the vegetation is it does not allow us to actually go there, the shrubs, etc. Now, Amatrice lost many of its symbols after the earthquake, and one of those symbols are these walls, the walls of the city that we are seeing now. A defensive system, 2.5 kilometers of walls that, of course, were aimed at defending the city. Now, among the very few things that remained that survived the earthquake, there are, in fact, these walls. Now, these walls were not, or did not lean on buildings. It was a separate type of building, and of course, in time, it was not used anymore for defensive purposes. And however, the earthquake did not hit that wall as it did the other buildings, and in fact, 40% of the walls still are intact. Now, these walls are very peculiar because there are no other similar walls in other cities in the Abruzzi region dating back to that same period. So, in fact, it is very interesting to study how those walls were built and how they developed throughout time. Now, Amatrice was very well known for its defenses. In fact, in 1811, for example, there is a journeyman who refers or who talks about those walls. And then the frescoes of Dionisi Cappelli of 1842 depicts a wall around the Virgin Mary. So, true enough, the earthquake has taken away almost everything to Amatrice. However, I believe that if we carry out proper actions, if we do our work and roll up our sleeves and do things as best as possible, we will be able to actually allow to shed the light on, for example, those monuments, the remaining ones that perhaps previously were not so well known to visitors, but that now instead are receiving much more interest, such as the walls. So we would like to start rebuilding Amatrice, starting from the walls, in order to leave to our new generations a city, a town that is even more beautiful than the one that existed before the earthquake. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessio, very much. It is a very important challenge. Today we were talking also with Alessandro Bozzetti, who is our president, and of course the association is willing to participate to this regeneration, because we think that to give a sign that there is something to do over the reconstruction, it is very, very important, and the regeneration of Amatrice is mandatory also for the association and its company. So thank you very much. We will work together very hard in the future. So this is the end for this first day. We started as usual. We are in Italy, so we started 15 minutes later, or it was 20, I don't remember. But we are finishing on time. We have just 20 minutes of question time. There is a chat on our website, www.restorationweek.it. I have a first question from the United States. During the interview of the bishop, he was talking about the reconstruction of a huge complex. We have the opportunity to have here Sergio Mazza, architect, MIBACT, so Ministry of Culture, and coordinator of the project of the restoration of the Church of Santa Maria Assunta within the complex of the Dominoxy. Architect, we need a microphone. Thank you very much.
Buonasera.
Good evening to everybody. Now, well, as you said, I belong to a group. I am the coordinator of a project for the restoration of the Church of Santa Maria Assunta of the Dominoxy complex. And of course, this perhaps represents an area that is not as historical as the other areas in Amatrice, but nevertheless it is not less important than other areas. In fact, if we look back into history, the founder Dominoxy, a military chaplain, was very, very much devoted to the creation of this complex, a complex that dates back to the 1930s, so of the past century. So we were asked to involve about 50 people, engineers, architects, historians, restorers, to project the restoration, to draft a project for the restoration of this church. One of the few structures that have somehow survived after those three quakes that happened here in Amatrice. Differently from other structures, from other buildings, it was created with mixed materials, with cement, reinforced cement on the one hand, and on the other hand, other materials that were able to better withstand the quakes themselves. So now, in terms of the approach that we had to take, of course, our approach was different because traditionally we're faced with buildings that are more historical in nature. Now, the structure is rather homogeneous, so when deciding on the types of activities to be carried out, we have to consider that we cannot proceed with a stopgap approach, one part after the other, but we have to study the entire building as a whole and act consequently. Now, this are the surveys that have helped us draft the final project, which is almost finished and that we hope to present soon in order to then start with tender. And we will present this project in the next month of October. Now, here on the left, there on the top, there is a structure, the church. So this is a structure that we had to that we had to create in order to protect that facade, and which entailed also the dismantling of the blocks of marble, which were very large, even 1.40 meters, and so 36 blocks that were enormous, and which were placed in the facade of the church. So we had to dismantle them, and of course that work was very, very involving. It was very difficult for the workers who carried that work in order. So we decided to do that, however, because subsequently we wanted to change that facade. Now the church, so with the exception of that facade, where we created the structure in iron, which was used to dismantle those blocks, and we had to start from the top and then move slowly towards the bottom. Now, this basilica has a longitudinal plant, the superior and the inferior one, so we had to reinforce the inferior part in order to establish or to create that structure in iron, which we used to dismantle the blocks. Now, we carried out a representative study of all of the fissuring and also of all other aspects connected to infiltration of water, which, of course, occurred after the earthquake. Now, we are about to complete this project. Will be presented in the month of October. And in this project, we have set forth a whole set of activities that will allow the restoration of the building. Here we see the fissuring. There on top in the left, you can see how the building moved. So now this church is very long, very high, and thus the proportions are not perfect. And this, of course, had some bearing on our activities, and which involved also some risks. So of course, we had to actually try to take a step-by-step approach to protect the various parts of the building with scaffolding, which was used both to protect that specific part of the church, but also scaffolding, which of course was used to all other operations carried subsequently. Now, a whole set of studies were carried out also in terms of the static connotation of this building. Now, these are non-traditional structures. Mist structures have or entail a whole set of problems, of issues, and therefore this has a bearing on the activities that have to be carried. So first we carried out a historical analysis, a survey, and we came up with a whole set of proposals, and of course we had to consider also the possibility that this church had to be made as open as possible to public afterwards. So now this is a fresco which unfortunately was almost destroyed by the earthquake, a fresco which occupies the largest part of this wall, and among the various proposals that we made. Now, unfortunately, we don't know if this fresco will be or can be restored, and we don't know what proportion of it can be restored. So while we're waiting to decide and to see how much of that fresco we can restore, we decided to proceed as follows. We wanted to put actually a depiction of that fresco. So on top of that area with the pictures in order to allow then visitors to see what the original fresco represented. Now, unfortunately, we were not able to recover the original project of the church, the original plans of the church. We were not able to study them. And this, of course, caused a lot of problems, not only in the historical and critical analysis of the church itself, but it also created problems in terms of the subsequent intervention. So we had to also do some tests of, for example, the pillars to see what was their current state, and also of the plinths, which were positioned 95 centimeters on top of the pavement. So this is just to say some of the many difficulties that we had to face, given that the structure, as I repeat it, is a mixed structure and thus entails more problems. Now, to date, this structure was not put to safety completely because we were not able to complete the scaffolding completely. Now, for example, there are some marble in the inside which is still hanging, and the risk is that those slabs of marble may fall from one moment to the other. So we, of course, will have to at some point intervene in order to try to and somehow anchor or remove those slabs.
It was an important part that we didn't have the opportunity today to visit, but thank you for giving us another piece just outside the city center of the city, but also a very, very important part of the city. Thank you very much. We have several questions, but I think we can just answer to the last two questions because we are closing to the end of this live show today. Coming back to the museum of Cola Filotesio, we have the opportunity to have here the architect Daniele Carfagna, Superintendency of Rieti, Ministry of Culture, who is dealing with the restoration of the museum. Thank you.
Salve. Sì, come soprintendenza territoriale stiamo cercando di cominciare ad avviare.
Yes, well, in our office, the superintendent office, we carried out a whole set of studies over the reconstruction and the recovery of the buildings that had collapsed and of the goods that were present therein. Which in many cases we could not move from their original site. Now we have been working together, so the superintendency is working together with the Office of the Regional Secretariat, and we hope also the World Monument Fund, in order to carry out a common project in synergy, which may somehow close those operations required for the civic museum, the former church of Emilio, a building that is very, very important for the municipal administration, which of course is very interested in keeping a town museum. That's why they're very interested in, because they would like to continue to render that museum available to the public. So we will carry out some works of, we've tried to recover some parts of the frescoes in the sacristy, which unfortunately we're a bit behind as to that because there was a problem connected to the tower, which was about to fall on the church itself, so we had to protect that tower. So we're closing that phase, and we're consolidating part of the frescoes. We will consolidate part of the frescoes, the ones that are more interesting within Amatrice. And the works are about to start soon, quite soon, and we hope to end this chapter as soon as possible, such as to preserve and then subsequently restore, thanks to other funds, a very important part of the territory of Amatrice.
Thank you very much, architect. It's a very long day. Today we have the last question for today, and it is at the Paolo Iannelli, the engineer superintendent for the reconstruction. The Italian Ministry of Culture has defined guidelines for the reconstruction of historic building.
Sì, quando parliamo
Yeah,
diciamo
so
di
when we
eventi
talk
di
about
questo tipo
when we
che
talk about this type of events that destroy entire territories, there's a clear desire and also clear need to have some guidelines. And it's also clear that the guidelines have to be as detailed as possible. So the context and the situation is such that the ministry, as from the beginning, has acknowledged this need, and as from the beginning of 2017, enacted a number of guidelines on the reconstruction of the towns and hamlets, which are published in the website of the ministry. So these guidelines are of a cultural nature, because providing operational guidelines is extremely difficult. And maybe it's also not necessary, because the plans you need when you want to intervene in such disasters is so complicated that you need to define a number of guidelines when it comes to the definition of goals. So these guidelines are published in the website. Some topics were considered, like the reuse of cultural debris, but these also have an important value when it comes to those that deal with the new plan and planning that we were mentioning before.
Thank you very much, engineer. So, this first live episode of the Restoration Week from Amatrice is closing. Alessandro, can you come here just for the final greetings? Franca, do you want to come here just for the final greetings? You don't have the microphone, so let me just thank you everyone for being with us. And we are starting now the technical section, the meeting with the Italian companies. Sonia will tell you something, so thank you very much. See you tomorrow at 3 o'clock. We will be on time from Santo Stefano in Sensania. See you tomorrow.
Grazie. Grazie, arrivederci.
Thank you very much.